Sunak, the Prime Minister of United Kingdom. The Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida is here as well. Shaikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, is here too. Several other dignitaries are going to be pouring in a short while from now. The last one perhaps for the day is going to be the US President Joe Biden, who will touch down sometime around 7 p.m. and minutes after that is going to be sitting down with Prime Minister Modi for the all-crucial bilateral between the two countries. There are other bilaterals that are slated for the Prime Minister as well. With Shaikh Hasina, we are going to see that bilateral just up in a short while from now. 3 MOUs specifically that are going to be signed between India and Bangladesh. But it is not just the G20 Summit for the Prime Minister over the weekend. There are 15 bilateral meetings that are on the cards in the midst of the all-crucial two-day meeting. The theme of this year's presidency for G20 by India is One Earth, One Family, One Future. Unfortunately, we saw the Spanish president testing positive for COVID, is not going to be able to make it for the summit, but there is a delegation that is going to be here nonetheless. The G20 Summit is going to happen at the Bharat Mandapam tomorrow and day after, but like I said, on the sidelines, there are crucial bilateral meetings that are going to be held by the Prime Minister. 15 to be precise. So let's get you details of what exactly is on the Prime Minister's docket apart from the G20 Summit over tomorrow and day after. Let's take a look at some of those meetings that are going to take place. On the 8th of September, which is today, there are bilateral talks that are going to be held with the United States. Joe Biden, like I pointed out, with Bangladesh Prime Minister Shaikh Hasina, also with the Mauritius Prime Minister. All of that is going to happen today. There are 15 bilateral meetings all through today and tomorrow. Let's move on to what happens tomorrow now. September 9th, it is the first day of the G20 Summit, but there is a bilateral that is lined up with the United Kingdom, with Japan, Germany and Italy in the middle of all the sessions that we see of the G20 Summit. On the 10th of September, there is going to be a working lunch meeting of the Prime Minister with French President Emmanuel Macron. With also going to be an informal meeting with UAE, with Canada, with Turkey as well. There are informal meetings that are going to take place between India, South Korea, Brazil and Nigeria too. All of that happens on day 2 of the G20 Summit, perhaps in the middle of the sessions or post that, before these world leaders decide to go back to their respective countries. Bilaterals, 15 of them planned for the Prime Minister. The first one beginning today is going to be that between India and Bangladesh. Shaikh Hasina and Prime Minister Modi are going to be sitting at the talks table. 3 MOUs are going to be signed between the two countries. Let's take a look at what these 3 MOUs are. The first one is facilitating of smooth transactions between the Indian rupee and the Bangladeshi taka. Research in agriculture sector, cultural exchange is another pact that the two countries are looking to ink. Several power and railway projects are also going to be inaugurated. A lot of it is with the help and financial assistance of India, which is why we're going to be seeing both leaders sign on the dotted line when they sit down for those talks in just a short while from now. But the all-important bilateral today, the one that the world is watching, is that between United States President Joe Biden and Indian Prime Minister Modi. Remember, that bilateral meeting is going to take place sometime post 8 p.m. just an hour after US President Joe Biden lands here in India. So what exactly is on the agenda for these two world leaders and the two countries? There is going to be a review of consulates progress. Remember, in Ahmedabad, in Bengaluru, when the Prime Minister was in the United States not too long ago, there was a discussion of opening up of more US consulates in India. Ahmedabad and Bengaluru are two of those sites. What is the progress? That is going to be reviewed in this particular meeting today. The review is also going to be on relaxation of visa norms. Fast tracking of the GE jet engines deal is also something that we are going to be looking at. Remember, all of this was discussed when the Prime Minister was in the United States not too long ago. So this bilateral meeting between the two leaders is more of a stock-taking meeting than actually some big-ticket announcements coming out. Having said that, though, there is going to be the cooperation in semiconductor supply chain that is also going to be discussed between the two leaders, what the progress has been made in the last couple of days and the way forward. Enhancing of commercial collaboration in private sectors is also something that both leaders are looking to talk about. Nuclear reactors constructions deal is also going to be signed. Remember, not too long ago, a week ago in fact, India did get its first indigenously powered nuclear reactor started. That is something that they will be talking about when we see both those leaders at the talking table in a few hours from now. My colleagues are joining us, getting us the latest, not just on the bilateral, but also as far as the G20 summit goes. Akanksha, Pallavi, Abhishek and Siddhant joining us, getting us the latest as far as what is happening. Bharat Mandapam is where all of the world is going to be keenly looking at. They're all there from the Bharat Mandapam that is going to be hosting these world leaders over the next 72 hours. Coming to you, Pallavi, first. We've seen the press conference by the MEA giving us a list of what exactly is expected in the next 72 hours. Tomorrow is when all world leaders start gathering there for the opening session. But what's the mood like there right now? Is it just journalists there at the moment and perhaps officials of the MEA, or are we seeing anybody else as well?
Well, at the International Media Center, largely you have the entire world press. So there's a lot of anticipation because tomorrow, of course, is going to be the big day. And of course, by evening onwards, the big bilateral is also going to be happening between the American president as well as the Indian Prime Minister. So all coverage on that. But yes, the mood is very gung-ho. And there's a lot of showcasing of India's culture, of course, very much as expected is happening here. I mean, I got you a report a short while back from inside the Crafts Museum, an exhibition which has been set up. I mean, these are the little nuances which India is projecting, but it's not only just to show India's culture and heritage. There's also a trade and a business opportunity behind it. When I did speak to a special secretary, Muktesh Pardeshi, a short while back, and also to many of those participants in the Crafts Museum, they said that they think that the G20 Summit, which is going to showcase their work, can eventually help them to increase their sales. India would want to increase their exports as far as Indian handicrafts and crafts are concerned. So tomorrow, when that meeting begins, trade and economic ties are certainly going to be the big factor. That is something which the G20 Summit would want to highlight on. And India, as it gives up its presidency in its culmination, would want to leave behind a very strong and robust as well as an impressive legacy. We have been talking about it. I think one of the most important points they would certainly want to, and they managed to put it on the agenda, is of cryptocurrency. Second, of course, is of those kind of economic offenses. That requires a coordinated international cooperation, particularly beginning with the G20 Summit. India is going to, of course, prevail upon all the other countries which are going to take part in the G20 Summit, that you cannot anymore look at things in isolation. You have to be inclusive in nature. Every country does have the right, Poonam, to protect their own trade and economic policies and buffers and all of that. But at the end of the day, there has to be cooperation on certain fronts. Cryptocurrency, I'm insisting on, is going to be huge. I mean, you know, from a position where we did not want to acknowledge it, we've understood that it is something which is hugely popular and inevitable. But at the same time, it requires a regulation and monitoring. There's a certain amount of resistance that Indian Finance Minister did face when they were having those negotiations. But they have managed to convince all the countries in the G20 that you need to have a regulatory and monitoring mechanism. That's going to be one point. Double taxation. There are companies which work here, for example, Facebook, for example, X, then of course Amazon. All of them may be paying taxes in the country of origin, but when they're operating here and very successfully, they don't pay any tax to the Indian government. That is also what Finance Ministry sources have been telling us has been a part of the negotiating table. Again, some resistance comes in from some countries like China, but that is also going to be discussed. Third, climate, something which is very, very dear to the Prime Minister. That is also something which is going to be taken up across the table. Again, some resistance from China and from Saudi Arabia, but India thinks this is important. So when we keep on talking about Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, it is not just a slogan. It is also a very deep-rooted trade as well as economic mantra which India wants to push.
Absolutely, and there is a lot that India wants to talk about as far as this entire G20 summit is concerned, which is why we're also seeing it's not just about business, it's also about showcasing India's culture and heritage, a lot of which is seen at the Bharat Mandapam. But before we get into that, Zaka Jacob, Managing Editor, joining us here, taking this forward.
So the Group of 20 or the G20 started off in 1999 on the back of the Asian financial crisis. At that time, the premier institution to deal with the world's problems was the G7. But they realized very soon that this was a financial crisis that started outside the purview of the G7 countries. It quickly spread around the world, and therefore they needed a forum that was far more encompassing. So when the 2008 global financial crisis happened, they moved this to the level of heads of state. And the first big heads of state level meeting of the G20 happened in Berlin in 2008. And ever since, for the last 15 plus years now, the G20 has become the premier forum for dealing with the economic issues and the big economic questions of our time. But is it relevant anymore at a time when the world is deeply fractured, at a time when we're seeing this great power competition between the United States on the one side and its Western partners and Russia and China on the other? How relevant is the Group of 20 or the G20? Let me go across to a very special guest who's joining us live and exclusive here on CNN News 18. Borge Brende is president of the World Economic Forum, who represents, of course, some of the biggest economic superpowers in the world and the not-so-superpowers, as it were. Mr. Brende, thank you very much for speaking with us here on CNN News 18.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me on such an important gathering for India, but also for the world.
So let me start off by asking you, as I introduce the Group of 20, which has become the premier forum in the last 20 years to deal with the biggest economic questions that confront the world, do you believe that the G20 is still relevant in a deeply divided, fractured world where you're seeing this almost, some people are calling this the new Cold War between the United States and China. There is the actual war that is happening between Russia and Ukraine. What is the relevance of the G20?
I would say that G20 has never been more important, because what we are totally missing in the world today is trust. So we have to rebuild trust, and the only way to do so is to bring countries together. And here India is in a unique position, because India has trust among all the relevant players, and I think India has brought together the key decision makers in New Delhi. And even in a fractured and fragmented world, as you also underlined, there are topics and issues that are truly global. Issues that don't travel with a passport. We saw it during COVID. New pandemics, we will need to work together. Big climate change, it's the hottest July on record in history. We need now to walk the talk and find ways of dealing with energy security and access, but decouple this from growth in CO2 emissions moving forward. So G20 is very important.
So you talked about energy security, and one of the things that's happened as a consequence, as a fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war, is that countries that are far removed from this conflict, India, the countries in the African Union, countries in Latin America, are dealing with the ripple effects caused by this war, whether it is food inflation, fuel inflation, fertilizer inflation. In that context, what can these countries, India included, and India is hoping to be the voice of the global south, what can they do to try and impress upon or to try and pressure upon the principal players involved in this conflict, with not just Russia, Ukraine, but also the other big powers that have a very critical role in it, that look, a war is not isolated to where it happens. It affects every one of us.
Indeed, and I think a good starting point, especially among the permanent members of the Security Council, would be that we all stick to the UN Charter. The UN Charter is clear on its principles. But as you said, what we have seen as a result of the Ukraine war is not only big sufferings in Ukraine and also tripling of energy and electricity prices here in Europe, but we also have seen that it has impact on food prices. We have seen some countries, of course, not faced with higher energy prices, but some other countries are really faced with that. So hopefully this G20 meeting, but also the upcoming UNGA meeting in New York in September, will put increased pressure on the different players also involved to find solutions based on the principles in the UN Charter for an outcome of the Ukraine war.
One of the criticisms against multilateral institutions like the G20, and I'm sure as the head of World Economic Forum, you faced this as well, is that it's not representative of the world's south, the global south, as it were, countries in Africa, in Latin America, in the poorer parts of Asia. How relevant is this criticism that ultimately, if you want to find a solution to the biggest problems that our planet is facing, from debt sustainability to climate financing to the fallout of the war, you need large parts of the world whose voices are often not on the high table.
No, very important point, and I agree. I think Prime Minister Modi and India has taken important steps in this regard for this G20 meeting, though, including also important voices from the Global South. India has also made the African Union a permanent member of the G20, something that was very timely and shows that the G20 is today just a picture of the 20 largest economies in the world today. But we know that many emerging economies and developing countries are moving very, very fast up the ladder. We expect India to be the third largest economy just in a few years. Maybe we're talking even months. We have US, China, and today we have Japan and Germany. I think that India very, very soon will be the third largest. We also see emerging powers like Indonesia, Nigeria, Brazil growing very fast. So we are in a situation where the world is between orders. We had one post-Cold War order. That one is definitely over. The new order, we don't know yet, but the new order also needs to then factor in that there are new countries that are very populous, that are also very economically growing fast, that need to be around the table when important decisions are taken. But we should not in this context then forget the United Nations and multilateralism. The UN is the only forum where all countries are there. Each of them are represented in the General Assembly. So that is, of course, the full reflection of the diversity of the world.
I just want to press a little more on this multilateralism that you talked about. Since the end of the Cold War, for the last 30 years or so, multilateralism has been the defining feature. And you have various groupings, right? You had the Group of 20, you first had the G7, then you have BRICS and SCO, now you have the Quad. So a whole bunch of multilateral groupings. But in a world where I think over the next 10, 20 years, the defining feature is going to be this new Cold War or the great power competition between US and China. And of course, Russia is in China's corner. The US has its European partners in its corner. How relevant is multilateralism? I had Professor Mearsheimer on the show last night. He said multilateralism, if not dead, is pretty much on life support right now.
I think multilateralism is more important than ever, but it is not functioning like we would like to, because in the world we're living, the most pressing challenges are global. And if you're going to deal with food crisis, energy crisis, future pandemics, indebtedness, reviving economic growth, these are not issues each country can deal with on its own. But you also rely very much on other countries. And you cannot decide over other countries, but to bring all these countries together and try to find commonalities and build trust is so important. 200 years ago, we were not that interconnected. But today, we are, for example, all feeling that the second largest economy in the world, China, is growing less. That has impact also on the global growth. Just 2-3 years ago, China was contributing with 37% of all global growth. So if that engine is now growing slower, then it has impact on all of us. We know also on trade issues that, of course, the fact that we have been trading with each other and also use the comparative advantages. If India is good at something, you export that, and then you import something that others are good at. This win-win thing has now been challenged. We're seeing much more friend-shoring, near-shoring, and de-risking. Some of it, I think, will stay, but it's important that we don't lose the baby with the bathwater, because trade has been the engine of growth during the last decades. And if there is no growth, there is no prosperity, and there is nothing to also resources then to distribute to those that are more vulnerable. And that's also the fact related to the Sustainable Development Goals, like eradicating all extreme poverty by 2030. We're lagging far behind. And a prerequisite for moving forward is more inclusive growth. We need to get growth back. Of course, India is in a very privileged situation, growing now 8%, maybe 9%, the fastest growing of the big economies of the world.
No, but I want to press on that a little more, because you look at the global economic map right now, much of Europe is under recession, they are degrowing. The United States is flat. China, as you said, which was the engine of growth for the last 30 years or so, is really slowing down in a big way. Now you have these newer growth centers like India, Saudi Arabia, Nigeria. How do these countries, and assuming that they can sustain this growth for a reasonable period of time, how do they find themselves a place at the high table?
So it's good news that these countries like India, Nigeria, Indonesia, Brazil is growing and substantially. That also has a very positive impact on the other economies that are growing more slowly. As I said, India is in a very special situation here now because due to the digitalization and also the digital IDs, is a very digital literate country. That could maybe inspire the others. When we look at the global growth, though, it's not that bad. It's 3% expected this year, and maybe the same next year. So we're not out of the woods, but there are also a fact that, for example, the US, we were even expecting we're going to be in a recession late this year, and doesn't seem like it's happening. Most European countries are still growing, with the exception of Germany, that might be in the recession.
But a final word, you look at this massive diplomatic high table that's convening here in Delhi, the 20 most powerful countries and their leaders are going to be here at a time when I think it's very clear you have the United States and its European partners on the one side, and you have Russia and China on the other. And maybe it's coincidental, but fact is that the leaders of both Russia and China are not going to be here for the G20. They're not going to participate, neither Vladimir Putin nor Xi Jinping. How or what may be a benchmark or a yardstick for you to assess the success or otherwise of the Delhi G20? What will it be judged on? How will history view the Delhi G20?
I think there is a lot of enthusiasm around India's G20 presidency already. I think it has also been able to get agreements on a lot of important decisions. Let's see when the final declaration is out. When it comes to Russia and China, we should not forget that the premier of China is in New Delhi, and also Mr. Lavrov from Russia. And the key leaders from the G20 countries will be in New Delhi. Of course, there are swing states in this geopolitical competition that are not fully with China and Russia, and not fully with the US. And I think the G20 meeting in New Delhi will be a good way of trying to define what are the common interests we have. Even in a polarized world, we have to find solutions on some of the common challenges. Okay. And I think that's where India has a lot of sway and possibilities.
All right, Mr. Borge Brende, President of the World Economic Forum, thank you very much for your time, sir. And we'll see how this plays out for India, for the Group of 20, and of course, in shaping the trajectory of global relations over the next decade or so. Are we going to see an intensification of this great power competition between the US and its allies and Russia and China on the other? Or can countries like India, which don't have a dog in this fight, will they be able to bridge the gap? Thank you very much, Mr. Brende, for speaking with us. News and updates continue right here on CNN News 18. G20, as you expect, would be the focus right on the other side with my colleague Poonam.
वसुदेव कुटुंबकम
One Earth, One Family, One Future is the theme that Prime Minister Narendra Modi continues to harp on and push as far as India's chair or presidency of G20. The Leadership Summit also will focus on human-centric growth and globalization, not GDP-driven. That itself shows that we are for humanity. But this G20 and this rise of Bharat is deeply rooted and embedded in its Sanatan roots. Join us here on CNN News 18 as we get you the most comprehensive coverage of India's moment under the sun.
Whenever I
Welcome back. You're watching CNN News 18 with me, Poonam Burde, and this is our non-stop coverage on the G20 Summit that India is hosting. World leaders have already started arriving, and it's not just the G20 Summit. There are bilaterals that are being held on the sidelines as well. Just now, the Prime Minister has concluded his bilateral with his Mauritian counterpart. Mauritius Prime Minister Pravind Jugnauth just held a meeting with Prime Minister Modi. In a short while from now, we will be perhaps getting images of that particular meeting that came to the fore. Pallavi, my colleague, joining us, getting us more details on that. Pallavi, what was on agenda? What was discussed between the two leaders?
So it is the first bilateral meeting which the Prime Minister has just held a short while back, and we have those pictures coming out, Poonam. And, Mauritius Prime Minister, of course, is also one of the special invitees and a guest as far as the G20 Summit is concerned. What we are basically being told is, and we are going to get those details more in a short while from now, is that maritime security, that was one in topmost agenda as far as Mauritius is concerned. In fact, the Mauritian Prime Minister has always pitched for better defense cooperation, not just between India and Mauritius, but within the G20 Summit, because he feels that this is the only way we can secure the Indian Ocean, which also sees its fissures. The second important point is that Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, one family, one earth and one world, is something which he completely agrees with the slogan, small country, but it's important that every country matters and every country works together in cooperation. Mauritius, of course, has been one of the long-standing friends of India, and very good equations being shared between the countries, and the Prime Minister himself has accepted the fact that there's a large section of the Indian diaspora over there, and no country can be safe, certainly not in this Indian Ocean region, till maritime security is ensured. That's what we are being told is going to be one of the main pitches in the talks which has taken place between both the sides.
Right, Pallavi, thank you so much for getting us the latest on that. That's the first bilateral that has concluded for the Prime Minister. The next one is with Bangladeshi Prime Minister Shaikh Hasina. That is going to begin in just a few minutes from now, is what we're learning. That is the second engagement for the Prime Minister of the day. The third and the big ticket one, of course, is the bilateral with US President Joe Biden and a dinner with him after that. At 7 LKM is when we are going to be seeing Prime Minister Modi host his Bangladeshi counterpart for the bilateral meeting. Siddhant, my colleague, joining us, getting us more details. Siddhant, we have an idea of what's on agenda. There are 3 MOUs that are going to be signed between the two leaders. Is that about it, or can we expect some surprise announcements as well?
Well, yes. So right now, what we have been given to understand is that there is going to be 3 MOUs that are going to be signed between India and Bangladesh, and also facilitating smooth transaction of Taka and Rupee. Also, there could be some announcement expected in agro and cultural exchange, sectors like agro and cultural exchange, and several power and railway projects could get inaugurated or perhaps announced. So these are some key agendas when it comes to Bangladesh. Now, the MOUs are regarding cooperation for agriculture, research and education, cultural exchange agreement extended from 2023 to 2025, and MOU between India's NPCL and Bangladesh Bank facilitating Rupee and Taka transaction through network connection. Again, that is what has been on India's agenda, digital public infrastructure. So this particular meeting of Prime Minister Modi with Sheikh Hasina is very significant. She is going to attend G20 Summit tomorrow, and right before her arrival to New Delhi, there was a messaging which was done from her side, her office, for the minority Hindu community in Bangladesh, that Hindu community will be treated equally, and they should not consider themselves as a minority of Bangladesh. So that was a strong message which came from Sheikh Hasina right before her arrival here in New Delhi. Now, it would be interesting to see that this particular meeting with Sheikh Hasina is going to take place at 7 LKM, 7 Lok Kalyan Marg, which is official residence of Prime Minister Modi. Now, usually, Poonam, whenever there are bilateral meetings or state or official visit of any of these heads of state, the meetings take place at Hyderabad House. Now, this time around, the location has been changed, and the location is Prime Minister's residence, which is very unexpected. Also, many believe that this has been done deliberately to give personal touch to these leaders coming to India when India is the host of this multilateral event. So that could be one reason that the venue has been shifted from Hyderabad House to Prime Minister Modi's residence, and also this has opened this new trend, and we could expect in future also that Prime Minister Modi would be hosting heads of state, heads of government at his official residence. So there's going to the bilateral with Mauritius, then bilateral with Bangladesh, and then late in the evening bilateral meeting with President Biden, and we could expect some sort of an announcement post that or a joint statement coming from both the leaders. Back to you.
Absolutely. We are expecting that bilateral with the Bangladeshi Prime Minister to begin in just a few minutes from now. Later in the evening, of course, is the big ticket meeting between US President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Modi. Do stay on with me. Akanksha Swaroop also joining us live from the Bharat Mandapam. It is the venue for the crucial G20 Summit tomorrow and day after. We've seen the kind of things that are on showcase, Akanksha, there as far as India's culture and heritage is concerned. But there's a lot to talk about India's journey as the voice of the global south as a leading world power is also concerned. Talking about the digital India, talking about the kind of innovations that India is looking at and is at the forefront at, all of that is going to be at display at this location.
Absolutely, and EU's President has also in fact raised that point about India playing that role and sort of bridging that gap between the industrialized economies and also the global south and technology. And remember, sort of augmenting the digital infrastructure has been on top of the agenda for India, something that it is also showcasing through the Bharat Mandapam, through the G20, and something we've been witnessing, you know, in all the symbolism that's been used while showcasing G20 as well, and through that theme of Vasudev Kutumbakam. India is sort of reinventing, reweaving that narrative of the global south, because remember at the MEAPC also the Foreign Secretary made it very clear that nowhere in the past so far has the global south been so extensively spoken about as it has been now by India in the joint declaration. So that's one key takeaway, the role of the global south and how India is showcasing. India has already taken the lead now when it comes to weaving all these issues, bringing the industrialized economies together and the global south as well. At the same time, a lot of questions have been raised about leadership of Russia and China missing, but you know, the Foreign Secretary also made it very amply clear that it doesn't matter, because if you look at it, Russia is being represented by the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. At the same time, China is also being represented by the Premier Li Qiang. And when you look at that, G20 becomes the biggest multilateral grouping right now if you compare it with, say, an ASEAN or an SCO, even the BRICS. It is the G20 which brings the West or the industrialized economies together with the emerging economies that come under the umbrella term of Global South.
Right.
And henceforth, it would be extremely skewed to sort of prioritize one country or India's own domestic agendas. And that's why even the Foreign Secretary said that, you know, you cannot mistake multilateral issues for bilateral issues.
Absolutely. They are two different issues. At the multilateral forum, which is the G20 Summit, we will see a lot that is being discussed as far as the world and its issues are concerned. Bilaterals, of course, will continue to happen on the sidelines, not just for India, but for the other world leaders as well. Before I get in my other colleagues who are also at the Bharat Mandapam, let's take a look at what exactly the Bharat Mandapam looks like. We have a sneak peek, we have some details of what exactly is on display there. There is going to be a culture corridor in the Bharat Mandapam, which is going to be celebrating the shared culture and heritage of all G20 members and even of inviting nations. So there are glimpses not just of India, but of all the nations that are going to be represented during this event. There's an iconic and notable cultural objects and heritage that has been incorporated in this particular corridor. It is a platform to promote and understand diverse cultural expressions, not just for India, but it is about educating the entire world of what their new allies are going to look like, what their journey looks like. There is also then going to be a digital India zone. Remember, this is India's decade, is what the Prime Minister has often said. So there are going to be insights into crucial initiatives that India has taken as far as the digital world is concerned. Aadhaar, DigiLocker, UPI, eSanjeevani, Diksha are some of the apps, some of the initiatives that are going to be on display. They're going to be showcased there. My Governance, CoWIN, Umang are all of those applications that are going to be showcased by the government in this digital India zone. Ask Gita will also be showcased, which will serve as a guidance, as an inspiration model for transformation. The app Ask Gita combines ancient wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita with AI technology. So it is an amalgamation of the old with the new and how that can guide us in the future. India is going to be showing a glimpse of that to the G20 nations. There is a pavilion that is dedicated to the Reserve Bank of India's innovation as well. There is going to be a demonstration of the multiple facets as far as cutting-edge technology in finance is concerned. All of that is going to be on display. The pavilion will also include the central bank digital currency, public tech platform for frictionless credit using technology to provide loan in digitized, paperless manner. That is something that is going to be displayed there. The unique payment system, which is UPI products such as UPI One World, RuPay and the Geo and cross-border bill payment is also something that will be on display there. They are going to be portrayed for world leaders to look into how exactly India is leading this digital revolution as far as financial payments are concerned. Experiencing the payment system, remember, UPI is not just limited to India anymore, it's going global. So the UPI One World that is designed by UPI for inbound foreign travelers, that is something that will be on showcase. How that works, all of that will be demonstrated for these world leaders and their delegation. It has been made for foreign nationals who do not have bank accounts in India. So all those who are going to be in attendance, apart from the foreign dignitaries, even journalists who are traveling here for the G20 Summit, all of them will be able to get a demonstration as to how this works. The app will help them experience a hassle-free and secure payments while they are in India. The wallets of these delegates will be pre-refunded with 2,000 rupees to show how this actually works. There is also how India's crafts, India's culture is going to be on display. The handicraft products, vocal from local is what the Prime Minister often speaks of. Handicraft products from different parts of the country are going to be in focus. We are going to be seeing one district, one product and geotagged items as well that are going to be on display. The delegates who are going to be in Bharat Mandapam over the next 48 hours, they can purchase these locally sourced products from Bazaar, where 30 states and union territories, several central agencies like the Khadi Village are going to be participating. They will showcase their skills, the workmanship of artisans and a special live demonstration by several master craftsmen from across the country has been planned by the G20 committee, by the country, to ensure that it's not just about conferences, it's not just about conference rooms and meetings, but it's also about taking in India's complete story. My colleagues have been getting us reports from inside the Bharat Mandapam of what exactly is on display, the digital infrastructure like I was talking about at the G20 Summit. Take a look.
We are here at the Digital India Experience Zone. This special area has been created for all the diplomats and journalists coming from across the world, all the partner nations, and they can experience what India has done digitally. And one very interesting find over here is this Digital India journey. Basically, what this is a setup done by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. To what happens over here is, if I can show you, that a person sits on this very cycle, and once they start pedaling, they will be taken through the urban areas of the country virtually, and in fact the milestones will be displayed over here. I'll try to show you from this very space exactly how it happens and how it showcases. Sir, can you explain us what this entire setup is all about?
This setup is all about the Digital India journey. Here basically we are showcasing the various transformational initiatives of Digital India and how it is impacting the life of people in India. So here you can see that UPI is there, which is making a transaction of 10 billion per month and leading to the value 185 billion. The next platform is ENAM. ENAM is about National Agriculture Mandi, and here basically 18 million farmers and 240,000 traders are there.
World leaders are in India. One of them is UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who in an interview to ANI has just a short while ago said that G20 has been a huge success for India. Remember, he landed in the national capital just a few hours ago with his spouse Akshata Murthy. He talks about how this is the right time and the right place for the hosting of the G20 Summit this year. Abhishek, my colleague, joining us, getting us more details. Abhishek, we're standing by for that interview of the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, but we are getting glimpses into what he's spoken about. Extremely confident in how India is poised to chair the G20 Summit over the next 2 days.
Of course, and while there will be some differences, but then the gathering of leaders and their personal relation probably with the Prime Minister Modi be able to create a consensus. We just had conversation with the Special Secretary G20 Muktesh Pardeshi also, who said that deliberations are still on, Sherpas are still meeting, and the fine prints are being prepared. And it cannot be said at this point of time that there will be enough of differences that the consensus of all the leaders will not be able to create the common document. So the hopes are still on. Indian presidency is trying hard to bring the differences to a close and create the common document. And talking about this UK Prime Minister's visit, clearly Prime Minister Sunak's first visit ever since he became the first Indian origin Prime Minister to UK is very important in multiple dimensions. First, of course, is his first bilateral visit to India, where he's going to talk about a lot of pending issues that India and UK have been having, from the trade, commerce to people engagement, collaboration in multiple new and emerging technologies, climate change. Russia-Ukraine conflict is also something that is very much in the mind of Rishi Sunak. Starting his journey from London, he clearly said that he is going to raise voice for the Russia-Ukraine conflict at the G20 Summit level talks. So while there will be other agendas that the world leaders will be discussing, from the climate change to common global good, certain issues that has emerged because of the Russian conflict in Ukraine would also find substantial mention. That is now clear from the Western side, at least. Meanwhile, the bilateral that Prime Minister Modi and Rishi Sunak will have, that will discuss and decide a lot of futuristic that India-UK relationship had, because we know that India and UK have already signed a 2030 roadmap vision, which entails how the two countries will move ahead on the path of defense collaboration, education, people-to-people exchange, trade, commerce, foreign policy. Indo-Pacific policy is something that the UK is very much interested in, and it considers India as a very strong pillar of its Indo-Pacific policy in that region. So these are all the issues of common concern that the two leaders will be discussing when they will be having bilateral meeting also.
Right. And trade is going to be high on agenda when we talk about the bilateral between the two Prime Ministers of India and the United Kingdom. We are, of course, standing by for that interview. But as far as the FTA is concerned, as far as the trade deal between the two countries are concerned, several rounds of talks have happened. Negotiation is on the right path. But unfortunately, we still don't have a time frame of when we could actually see it become a reality, isn't it?
Actually, Poonam, at least two time frames that was kind of told by the officials in the past have been failed by both the countries. Earlier, during the Liz Truss tenure, it was Diwali that was supposed to be the end date.
Is taking place here in the backdrop of a conflict, Ukraine and Russia conflict. So, do you think it will cast a shadow, and will it have an effect on the consensus building and the outcome?
Well, first of all, thank you for the warm welcome. It's fantastic for me to be back in India. Obviously, it's personally very special for me to be here, particularly with Akshata, and we've thoroughly enjoyed the first few hours of our trip so far. Now, when it comes to Ukraine and Russia and the conflict, one thing I will be doing is highlighting that the devastating impact that Russia's illegal invasion is having on millions of people around the world, particularly on food prices. Russia recently has pulled out of a grain deal that was shipping grain from Ukraine to many poor countries around the world, and now you've seen food prices go up. That's causing suffering for millions of people. It's not right, and one of the things I'll be doing is making people aware of that impact of Russia's illegal war.
So do you think it will have an impact on, will cast a shadow on the consensus building? Do you think there will be problems, the final outcome of G20?
No, I think there'll be many things that we'll be discussing here at the G20 under India's leadership, and I'm confident that we'll make very good progress on a range of different issues. I think G20 has been a huge success for India. India is the right country at the right time to be hosting this, and I feel we're going to have a very good couple of days of deliberations and decisions made.
How do you like the theme of one family?
I think it's a great theme, and actually when you say one family, I'm an example of the incredible living bridge that Prime Minister Modi described between the UK and India. Almost 2 million people like me in the UK of Indian origin. That's why it's very special for me to be here as British Prime Minister, in the country where my family are from.
So can you give us some sense of a connect with India, like your roots here?
Well, obviously, my wife is from here, from Bangalore. We got married in Bangalore. We used to spend lots of time together before we had children in Delhi, and we're trying to figure out if we can go to one of our old favourite restaurants this evening. But look, it's personally incredibly special for me to be back in India. It's a country I love dearly, a country where my family are from. But to come here in this role, to represent the UK, to find ways to forge closer links with India and play a part in making sure that India has an incredibly successful G20. And I'm very proud to see India doing so well on the world stage.
Sir, coming to the bilateral part of it, a free trade agreement is underway, under discussion between the two countries. How soon can we expect to complete?
Well, both Modi ji and I are keen to see a comprehensive and ambitious trade deal concluded between our two countries. Both of us think that there is a good deal to be done. But trade deals always take time. They need to work for both countries. And although we've made enormous progress, there is still hard work to go. And that's what we need to keep going through. The G20 is not the forum for those discussions. Of course, I will touch on that with Prime Minister Modi. But the teams are working very hard. But as I said, there's hard work to go, but we will keep working through it. But I think there is an enormous opportunity for both India and the UK to strengthen our economic cooperation, which will bring real benefits to our citizens in both countries.
Can you tell us something about your equation with Prime Minister Modi? You have met him a couple of times now.
Yes, and I have enormous respect for Modi ji, and he's been personally very warm and kind to me, and we're working very hard, as I said, on our shared ambition of concluding an ambitious and comprehensive trade deal between India and the UK, because both of us think that would be a good thing, and both of us need to make sure it works for our two countries. And at forums like this, I'm very keen to support Prime Minister Modi in making sure that this G20 is an enormous success for India, which I know it will be, and this has been a great year for India more generally.
Sir, another question. A lot of Indian community lives in your country there, and we have seen some ugly scenes of Khalistani protests, separatist protests. How do you secure Indian interests there? Because this is a big, huge issue between the two countries.
Yeah, it's a really important question, and let me just say unequivocally that no form of extremism or violence like that is acceptable in the UK, and that's why we are working very closely with the Indian government to particularly tackle PKE, pro-Khalistan extremism. I don't think it's right. Our security minister recently was just in India talking to his counterparts. We have working groups together to share intelligence and information so that we can root out this kind of violent extremism. It's not right, and I won't tolerate it in the UK.
Sir, how do you look at India's position on Russia and Ukraine?
Well, it's not for me to tell India what positions to take on international issues, but I know India rightly cares about the international rule of law, the UN Charter, and respect for territorial integrity. I think those are things that are universal values that we all share. Those are things that I believe, and India, I know, believes in those things too.
Sir, you have defined India-UK relations as a defining of our times. And what is the roadmap of 2030? Can you give us some broad sense of the bilateral relation there?
Yeah, well, I think the bilateral relationship is in good health, and Prime Minister Modi and I are keen to deepen and broaden our relationship. The FTA is an obvious way for us to do that, which is why it remains our priority. And as I said, hard work to go, but I hope we can conclude a successful FTA. I think we can strengthen our security relationship as well. That's something that I've spoken to the Prime Minister about. And then something I'm particularly excited about is increasing the collaboration between our incredible researchers, our scientific community, our universities. The UK and India are two of the leading science technology superpowers of the world, and I think if we work more closely together, we can create jobs, create new businesses, and help solve some of the world's most pressing problems.
My last question to you. You talked about your roots in India. People also there's much talk about your roots. You are connected to Hinduism, and you wear these rollies in your hands. Tell us something about it.
Yeah, so I'm a proud Hindu, and that's how I was raised. That's how I am. Hopefully I can visit a mandir while I'm here for the next couple of days. And yes, we've just had Raksha Bandhan, so from my sister and my cousins, I have all my Rakis. And I didn't have time to celebrate Janmashtami properly the other day, but hopefully, as I said, I can make up for that if we visit a mandir this time. But it's something that is important to me. I think faith is something that helps everybody who has faith in their lives, particularly when you have these stressful jobs like I do. Having faith to give you resilience, resilience to give you strength is important, and it provides an outlook on life which I find particularly valuable.
Thank you, Prime Minister, for answering all our questions. Thank you so much.
Great pleasure.
Thank you.
Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, there outlining what's on his mind as far as G20 Summit goes, also talking about his roots to the country. He is no stranger to India's culture and heritage. His wife Akshata Murthy in tow when they landed just a short while ago. He is going to be holding a bilateral meeting with Prime Minister Modi tomorrow in the midst of several of the sessions of the G20 Summit. A direct question asked to him about pro-Khalistani sympathizers running riot in London in the United Kingdom, and an unequivocal message coming to the fore from Rishi Sunak that this will not be tolerated. This perhaps is going to be raised when the two Prime Ministers sit down at the talks table when that bilateral happens tomorrow. But as far as the meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Sunak is concerned, a higher agenda is going to be the trade deal. The FTA has been in talks between the two countries. Several rounds of talks have happened, 12 if I'm not mistaken. Several of those timelines have lapsed as well in terms of realizing the trade deal between the two countries is concerned. So that perhaps is going to be high on agenda between the two countries when that bilateral takes place. But Rishi Sunak there going on to make it very, very clear that no form of extremism is acceptable. There is a clear message that has been sent to the police there as well. Iron fist policy will be in place as far as such pro-Khalistani extremism is concerned. Akanksha, my colleague, joining us live from the Bharat Mandapam. Akanksha, a clear message there coming to the fore from Rishi Sunak, but Ukraine is definitely high on Rishi Sunak's agenda as far as the G20 summit goes. Now, that is something that had divided many of the G20 partners last time around in Bali, which is why we did not have a joint statement that came out. Do you think that's something that could be a sticking point this time around as well?
That is a key sticking point. In fact, something that was also discussed and has already been indicated by India's Ministry of External Affairs today at the press conference as well. And as you rightly mentioned, Rishi Sunak, of course, being one of the leading voices which are supporting the Ukraine agenda. At the same time, we've seen other EU nations like Germany also talk about it. In fact, the EU president has also spoken about it. UN Chief Antonio Guterres has already said. So there's a lot of pressure on India, Poonam, to sort of bridge that divide and sort of navigate through that divide, which, as Russia has put, is being called as Ukrainization. But, on a more optimistic note, India's External Affairs Ministry also sounds very optimistic about coming up with the Delhi Declaration, something they've been working through till wee hours of the morning. It seems that they will try and have a consensus, and that there might be the Delhi Declaration finally showcased at the end of the summit, and that we may not have to eventually settle for a chair summary.
Right.
But Ukraine will be a key issue for all the nations, and that whether or not Ukraine overshadows those issues of the global south, of the emerging economies, is something which we will have to see.
Absolutely. All of that will be in focus as far as the G20 summit goes. But Akanksha, thank you so much for getting us the latest on that. On that note, it's a wrap from my side. Griha joins you next with Viewpoint.
It's India's G20 Presidency year.
The global south will shine.
The test of its multipolarity rhetoric.
Countdown to the big ticket event. Complete transformation for Delhi.
Unprecedented capital security.
Delhi becomes the world's diplomatic hub.
A 4-day lockdown and watertight security.
Quick response teams in place. World embraces India's youth.
To an ultimate India experience.
Vishwamitra leads global agenda.
A coverage like no other.
Only on CNN News 18.
welcome. Thank you so much for staying with CNN News 18. You're watching Viewpoint with me, Grihatu. Now, this evening on the broadcast, we talk about India's moment in the sun as the G20 president, as leaders from the most powerful nations in the world are flocking to New Delhi for the G20 Heads of State and Government Summit. The culmination of India's year-long presidency of the G20, the summit itself, will be concluded with the adoption of a G20 leaders' declaration, which will state the participating leaders' commitment towards